The Rational Male, Preventive Medicine by Rollo Tomassi. Chapter 1. Your Friend Menstruation. There are methods and social contrivances women have used for centuries to ensure that the best male genes are selected and secured with the best male provisioning shield subjectively be capable of attracting. Ideally, the best man should exemplify the best of both aspects, but rarely do these two exist in the same male, particularly these days. So, in the interest of achieving her biological imperative and prompted by innate need for security, the feminine as a whole needed to develop social convention and methodologies which change as her environment and personal conditions do to affect optimizing women's innate hypergamy. Years ago, when I was writing the post that would become the schedules of mating chapter for my first book, my emphasis was on how the evolved dynamic female pluralistic sexual strategy translated into evolved social dynamics, feminine primary social conventions. My focus then was on how the feminine creates and normalizes social conditions that favor hypergamy by covertly manipulating social expectation, not only of the men who would optimize the hypergamy, but also for women themselves in how their own self-rationalizations, hide-brain hamsters can be socially justified. I wrote the post schedule of mating in 2005 on Sociave in the effort of explaining the rudiments of hypergamy in a more accessible way for guys who were still struggling with understanding why women would say they wanted a nice guy with a good heart, yet would, in stark contradiction of this, behaviorally opt for bad boy jacks as their sexual partners of choice. I still think it's a pretty good essay, which is why I revised and included it in the earliest post at The Rational Male. However, even at the time I was writing, I knew that the concept of the evolved hypergamy and its social implications still had a lot more under the hood to explore. Biological hypergamy. The following is a quote from the 2008 study of hormones and brain activity from the Kingsley Institute. Quote, "One area of the brain in which we observe a difference in activation in response to masculinized versus feminized phases, specifically during the foveal phases, was the anterior circuitry cortex, which is the region involved in decision-making and the evaluation of potential reward and risk," said neuroscientist Heath Rapp, research fellow at Kingsley Institute for Research in Sex, Gender and Reproduction. Activation in this region has been previously reported to correlate with high-risk non-social choices, specifically monetary risk, so it is interesting that it is observed to be more active in response to masculinized male faces who may be both riskier but more rewarding to women. End of quote. There are a multitude of studies that indicate women's sexual preferences for facial characteristics shift depending on their menstrual phase. These fluctuating preferences are thought to reflect evolutionary founded changes in women's reproductive priorities. Around the time the ovulation of women prefer more masculinized faces with features that indicate high levels of testosterone. These facial cues predict high genetic quality in male because only such males can afford the immune system compromising effects of testosterone. Testosterone may be costly for the male's mates as well because high testosterone levels also are associated with high rates of offspring abandonment. Around the time of ovulation, a female's preference apparently shifts from avoiding neglect parenting to acquiring the best genes for her offspring. This principle is known in evolutionary psychology as ovulatory shift. At other points during the cycle, women will prefer more feminized male faces as they might signal a higher willingness of the males to invest in offspring. If you'll pardon the vernacular, what ovulatory shift happens in social contexts is what known in the monosphere as all alpha facts and beta bucks principle. The drive for optimization between the best direct genetic benefit, sex, and the best indirect benefit, parental investment and provisioning, is a biological hardwired feature for the female mind. Studies like these aren't unknown to the monosphere, and even the early pickup artist teachers had an almost instinctual understanding of how women's ovulatory cycle could affect a guy's odds of success hookup without even having read them. Needless to say, there is a plethora of practical application a man might develop in a firm knowledge of how a woman's hormonal cycle affects her mood, her susceptibility to his influence, and how her post-sex rationalization will be altered as a result of the particular phase of her menstrual cycle she happens to be in. In these blue pill years, I think a lot of what accounts for a guy's sporadic success with women can be attributed to the woman ovulatory phase and favorable circumstances. Right phase, right place, right time, and a guy who gave off his enough subconscious masculine prompts and alpha cues to get the lay, or the brief girlfriend status until her subsequent follicular phase peaked and he wasn't the alpha she thought he was 3 weeks prior. The alpha phase. From a game perspective, using the above illustration as a guide, the later half of the follicular proliferative phase, the period between day 7 to about day 14, might be called the alpha phase for men. The Kinsey study and many similar ones would indicate that this 7, maybe 10-day window predisposes women to alpha masculinized sexual influence and would be the optimal period for a man to make a lasting alpha impression. Sexual tingles are most commonly born in the proliferative phases. It is during this phase women are more predisposed to sexual ornamentation, dressing sexy, and vocal intonation changes. Masculine body odor becomes more appealing, and an overall preference for masculinized physical attribute, masculinity, intensifies as arousal cues for her in men. Female biochemistry and its resultant behavior pattern shift in the proliferative phases to optimize breeding potential with best genes, direct benefit, male a woman has or makes available to herself by subconscious design. I've got a lot of grief in the past from angry women for suggesting that all women have an inner slut and that all a guy needs to do is to find the right man, and all that a guy needs to do is to be the right man at the right time to bring this out in them. An understanding of the behavioral changes of ovulationary shift during women's menstrual cycle punctuates this. The hot code on spring break in Cancun who fucks the cute guy in the form canon party is most likely in her proliferative phase. Add alcohol and you have got the chemical formula for sexual urgency, even from a good girl. When she thinks or says, I don't know what came over me, I am not usually like this, she is observing her proliferative phase behavior from a literal phase perspective. She really isn't like that the other 21 days of her cycle. It's during this part of the woman's cycle that she becomes subconsciously attuned to masculinized traits and makes subliminal efforts to capitalize on her concurrent ovulation. In other words, this is the period in which hypergamy doesn't care the most. It fucks me now, I'll rationalize it later. About now, probably wondering, that's well and good, but how do I determine what cycle phase a woman is in? If all a guy was doing was cold approaches with women, I could understand the situation. I could understand the confusion. These are the contrast styles women will display when they are in their proliferative phases. Dr. Mali Heselton of UCLA has done some excellent studies on female ornamentation coinciding with ovulation, and also how women's vocal pitch shift lower, stuttery voice, during this phase. But if you are still unconvinced, listen to your gut. Men instinctually know when women are in the prophase of ovulation. In fact, the phenomena of mate guarding is a well-studied dynamic that appears to have evolved in men as a result of subconscious awareness of women's behavior cues during the period of their ovulation. If you have the patience to learn, pay better attention to the behaviors of the women in your immediate social circle or to the behaviors of the girl you think you may want to target at some point. Beta phases. If the proliferation phase in the alpha phase for men, then the neutral phase could be considered the beta phase. Again, using the Kinsey study, as well as many from Dr. Hasselton as our general guide, we can infer that women become drawn to more feminine features in men during the 14-day downside in their cycle. The attributes of attraction, not arousal, that define this stage are associated with comfort, familiarity, empathy, nurturing, etc., meant to reinforce the perception that a man is a good choice for long-term parental investment. Again, this is nothing novel in the monosphere. Even my monosphere colleague, Roise, has written several posts regarding the applied use of beta side game within context. Far too many men believe the what you see is what you get myth about women and their advertised attraction, liquid as being predominantly beta associative. As I illustrated before, the girl who spontaneously backed the hot guy in the form canon party is the same girl who will say you need to earn her trust because she needs to be the comfortable with you before you have sex. Beta prone men believe this at a face value and don't strike while the iron is hot, the proliferate phase. Wait her out and wonder why they get let's just be friends at the end of the neutral phase. I think when most beta men lose the trail is in the belief of beta attraction is or should be synonymous with alpha arousal. Each of these concepts is representative of a different facets of women prolistic sexual strategy. Hypergamy, alpha seed, beta need. Women's sexual imperatives can be defined by the degree at which her short-term mating strategy can be justified or offset by long-term mating strategy. Nowhere is this disparity more obviously manifested than in the biological reality of a woman's menstrual cycle that creates it. The hypergamy link. One aspect of the hypergamy that is not certain most men really understand is that the social sexual strategy that is hypergamy is a biological phenomenon in origin. To fully understand the timeline I present in this book, it is important not to confuse hypergamy with being a social construct, that is, marrying up. Women almost categorically, even deliberately, maintain a strict definition of hypergamy as only a learned social dynamic. This is more from a need to protect the rationalization that results from confronting the uncomfortable internal conflict that hypergamy causes for them. You will hear women agonize with themselves. Why am I not hot for the sweet beta who would give me the world but can't get enough sex from the hot guy who is casually indifferent to me? The feminine primary social order. The best truth of hypergamy as a social dynamic is that it is a logical result of women's innate hormonal and psychological firmware. This root-level disparity of dualistic sexual strategy, alpha facts and beta bugs, led to the evolution of the feminine seek, to be covert, to be excessively deprecious, and involved psychological capacity to be a better communicators on many varied levels, but also to be the nurturers necessary to raise the next generation. Without this facility for being beneficiary duplicious on a psychological level, women cannot as effectively optimize their sexual strategy. Since the sexual revolution began, the biological rationale of social feminization has been men's biological proclivity for violence and aggression. Our biological proactiveness makes us potentially dangerous. We are told that we are poisoned by our testosterone. We are controlled from youth to repress that in school to the point where teachers expect boys to act out, so we drag them. Yet, the biological rationale for hypergamy could also be said to lie in the women's biological menstrual impetus that motivates their sexual pluralism. It is exactly this biological motivation with the feminine primary social order has been established in wake of sexual revolution. As you read through the following timeline, it is important to fully grasp the feminine primary motivations behind the reasoning for the personal and the social shift a woman will experience at various phases of her maturity. Understanding hypergamy. The reason I am beginning with hypergamy before we get involved in this chronological is because it is important to get a good idea of hypergamy's incentives and how they motivate women during these phases. The social aspects and the personal aspects for women maturation process hinges upon how hypergamy influences women decision making and ultimately affects the men who engage with them during those phases of her life. Both the personal and the social elements of hypergamy work in concert to produce a relatively predictable chain of events, personal crises, and life decisions throughout a woman's life. Much of the monosphere likes to define hypergamy as a woman getting the best bang for her attractiveness bag, but this is only one side of hypergamy. Using the alpha facts beta bugs principle for women dualistic sexual strategy, it becomes clear and there is a drive to balance hypergamy between these two impulses. As I began in stages of mating, hypergamy wants to have both sides of the woman's sexual strategy equation satisfied by the same man, but rarely is this dualistic satisfaction meant in the same individual, and increasingly, more men are becoming aware of this strategy. It is my belief that a drive of hypergametic optimization exists in both the impulse to secure the best genes, sexy son theory, alpha facts, and the best provisioning emotional investment, parental investment, beta bugs, a woman's attractiveness can be leveraged for. The problem then is one of the leveraging her attractiveness relative to any particular phase of her life and the circumstances that face dictates for her. Needless to say, a woman's physical conditions, her personal decision, and modern social pressure will influence this balancing act. Careism, feminism, religious conviction, etc. But it's only half correct to apply hypergamy only to the alpha fact side of women's dualistic sexual strategy. Finally, it is also important to consider that from an evolutionary standpoint, hypergamy always seeks an optimization of either sides of the alpha facts beta bugs motivates that is better, more advantageous than an individual woman's attractiveness should realistically warrant. Hypergamy doesn't seek its own level. It will always seek a better optimization than a woman's sexual market value has a realistic expectation to afford her. Also, keep in mind that modern social pressure, social media, etc., exacerbate this and further distort women's realistic evaluation of their sexual market value at any given phase of her life. The most secure monogamous attachment women will make are with men they perceive to be 1 to 2 points above what she perceives in her own relative sexual market value. I had a rational male reader pose the following question on the blog. Knowing what we know about hypergamy, that it is inborn and does not give a crap, and also what we know about women attraction cues sway in toward much more alpha men during ovulation. Can men deal with the thought of living with someone who is having to fight against, presuming she is fighting against it? A general innate desire to trade up and a specific desire to stray in an alpha male during ovulation? The short answer to this is yes. In fact, men have had social and psychological evolved contingencies to mitigate hypergamy since our hunter-gatherer beginnings. You could even argue that much of our cultural and species-level achievements were the results of men-written drives to deal with women innate hypergamy. The common mistake is to presume that hypergamy natural states exist in a vacuum. Hypergamy is not static. The capacity an individual woman possesses to optimize hypergamy is specific to that woman. There are many complex variables that affect what contributes to a woman's self-perception of her sexual market evaluation. For a general instance, a hot 22-year-old Cole will generally be more predisposed to the alpha fuck side of her hypergamous impulse because she has a better capacity to capitalize on it than a 44-year-old divorced mother of two. Many guys think that hypergamy requires this endless attending to, but with an exception of outlier women. Women will regulate their hypergamy based on their self-perceived capacity to optimize it. Simply because a woman's natural state is hypergamy doesn't mean she is able to optimize it. She may lack opportunity, that is, no alpha men in the right place or at the right time. She may lack the physical appeal. She may have internalized beliefs and that causes her to be more self-cautious. She may have self-esteem issues, over and under-inflated, or she may simply be cultured in a society and enforces limits upon her capacity to optimize hypergamy. All of these limiting conditions contend with her innate hypergamous impulse. This is the primary struggle women face, managing this limiting condition while contending with a hard-cold hypergamy, or before facing the inevitable progression towards her lessened capacity to outperform her sexual competitors. Cash in too early and face the nagging doubt she could have consolidated with a more optimal man's commitment. Cash in too late and live with the consequences of settling on a suboptimal man. Her looks, personal and conditions and societal influences allowed her to consolidate on alpha windows. All of this occurs within the framework of the personal limitation or beliefs women individually have a capacity for. Hypergamy unbound. One common misunderstanding most women have about hypergamy is that it requires constant attention to mitigate. Most men, going their own way, follow in logic to some degree, thinking that the effort necessary to contain women hypergamy means this endless mind-leading or jumping through behavioral hoops in order to maintain some balance and harmony in any relationship with a woman. They believe the payoff simply isn't worth the effort, and by their individual case, they may not be correct. However, what they don't account for is the natural balance that already exists between the genders. Hypergamy is a fast easier to contain the less a woman is able to capitalize on it. Imposing limitation on a woman hypergamy is really a matter of implication. Why is our reflective response to label possessive men as insecure? Because beneath an overt exercising of control, we believe a man lacks the capacity to inspire genuine desire in a woman, which prompts her to self-regulate her own hypergamy. Yet, we still consider mate guarding behavior, both conscious and subconscious, to be the wise in measured application. So when you have the line in controlling hypergamy, like virtually anything else in the game, apply it overtly and you appear insecure. Apply it covertly and you appear confident and in control. To really grasp this, you have to also take into account the alpha-beta response dynamic. Women's inborn hypergamy will predispose women with even most secure attachment to their mate to shit testing. When men become aware of this, their rational mind sees as insecurity and a nuisance they will constantly have to deal with. However, nature has engineered into our own psyche and the means to deal with this test in ways we are not really aware of. I have seen the most passive of men put their foot down after a particularly cruel shit test and basically tell their wives or girlfriends to shut the fuck up. It came from exasperation, but the provocation and the response their woman got for it was exactly the requirement for passing the test. Of course, they didn't realize they were doing it. They were just pissed, lost their temper, and usually apologized profusely for acting so brash after the fact. However, this was exactly the response hypergamy needed to confirm that this wasn't a pushover. Mate guarding is another of these subliminal efforts employed to contain hypergamy. Most men don't realize that they are manifesting mate guarding behaviors at exactly the time this woman is ovulating and more aroused by the masculine cues of an unfamiliar alpha. Her disposition manifests in behaviors that his psyche evolved to register and reflexively trigger his own subconscious mate guarding behavior, all in a naturalized effort to contain her innate hypergamy. For men, nature is already aware of hypergamy and has contingencies to limit it. Ovulatory shift in mate preferences and the evident behavior shifts that result from them prompted an involved sensitivity to them in men. In turn, this peripheral awareness produced contingencies behavior made guarding to ensure a man wasn't wasting his parental investment effort with a child that wasn't his own. An evolved mate guarding sensitivity and contingent strategies was insurance against the cowardly risk inherent in women hypergamous sexual strategy. I would argue that a contingent mate guarding strategy evolved as a direct response to alpha or beta competition stresses, but rather to the woman innate hypergamy. Their sexual pluralism and the potential for parental investment deception when women were left with their hypergamy unchecked. If a woman's predominant perception of you is alpha, in her mental point of origin is one in which she recognizes her own sexual market value as being subordinate to your own. She won't be asking your permission to go to Las Vegas with her girlfriends for the weekend because her desire for a man she perceives as alpha, hopefully you, will be stronger than the peers' influence of her during her ovulation week. In theory, no woman who sees you as her perceived alpha and hypergamous best interest will want to cheat on you, so the idea doesn't occur to her. I realize this sounds simplistic until you consider the readiness in which most men will similarly isolate themselves socially, putting off friends and family in preference of spending time with what he believes is a high-valued woman. Another aspect of limiting hypergamy is the intersexual competition women subject each other to. Hypergamy is essentially a race to the top. The higher value resources drive down the cost for the lower value ones. The highest value men cascade in value by the frequency of lower value men, but it is important to remember that hypergamy doesn't seek its own level. It always defaults to a better optimization. For a woman, the biological jackpot is to secure a commitment of genetic and resources from a male who registers higher than herself in the sexual market value valuation. The very nature of hypergamy has a culling effect for women, as in the pressures to optimize, hypergamy weren't urgent enough in the light of her personal condition and the impending expiration of her sexual competitiveness, and to this, an unforgiving intersexual competition that mitigates hypergamy. Thwarting nature. If a guy swings drastically toward the better champ side of the bell curve, this may well trigger a new self-perception of a woman and reinvigorate her hypergamous impulse. Likewise, our current social media experience is contributing to new generations of women who lack any realistic self-image with regard to sexual market value and thus false perception of their capacity to optimize their hypergamy. Women's overinflated sense of sexual market value and all the contributing factor to it is the monosphere meme now. All of these factors and more upset the balance of the feminine imperative with the masculine and now demand new social and psychological adaptation, that is, formalized game. Many of the monosphere commentators will tell you how unbound women's hypergamous nature has become since the rise of the feminism and the multi-generational push to feminize every aspect of Western culture. While it's true that hypergamy doesn't care, and many a man suffer the unprepared consequences of outdated expectation of relational equity, I don't believe the cultural shift toward the primacy of the feminine imperative is the doom of modern society. To be sure, the sexual revolution and the feminine-controlled ubiquitous hormonal birth control has radically shifted social primacy to the feminine imperative. But what this means is readjustment to the masculine imperative is now necessary. With the rise of the internet and the meta game, that is the monosphere I think we are seeing this adjustment in its beginning. With the rise of the internet and the meta game, that is the monosphere I think we are seeing this adjustment in its beginning. In our past, society and nature evolved ways to contain hypergamy in ways we are only peripherally aware of today, but they were serviceable contingencies that kept hypergamy in check. That balance will return eventually either by men opting out of their traditional measures or women coming to generational realization of the predicament unbridled hypergamy and the consequences of the falsehood femicentrism has brought to their mothers and grandmothers. End of chapter 1.